What's going on, people? This is the Black Trekker. Like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for taking time out your morning, afternoon, or evening to sit in with me for a few ticks so I can tell you about another outstanding episode that I was able to watch. I've seen it before, but with Star Trek, you got to watch it more than one time. It's like Lay's potato chips. You just can't have one. Anyway, so this episode is about the outrageous Okona. The outrageous Okona was an entertaining and somewhat comical episode that is indeed worth watching, and I recommend it. If you haven't seen it, check it out. So this takes place in the second season, I believe the 5th episode. And as you know, the Enterprise is an exploratory vessel above all things. So what occurs is they go into an unremarkable star system. Starships have been to this system before, but and they know that it's humanoids that live there. Their technology is equivalent to like the Botany Bay of the 21st century. So it's technologically less superior to the Enterprise D. I mean, by all accounts, the metals that are used to construct the Enterprise D are woefully 100 years more advanced than what they can produce. So this technology is basically antiquated. So they discovered that there's a freighter, and the freighter's having mechanical issues. It's having engine problems, and it's also having navigational problems. So what they do is Picard stands up and he says, open hailing frequencies. Open. He's like, this is the Federation Starship Enterprise. The spiel that Picard says. How may we render assistance? So then the communication is open. And he's like, my name is Thaddeus Okona. And, yada, yada, yada. And he's like, please, Captain, don't use your phasers for a mercy killing. And then Captain Picard was like, well, we never perceived you to be a threat. And then he responded by, Captain Okona was like, well, I remember at least when I was perceived as a risk. And so he was like, well, we understand that you're having issues with your navigation system and your engines. And Captain Okona was like, well, being that you can diagnose, can you perhaps help me with my problems? And then so Picard mutes the channel, turns to Counselor Troy. Counselor Troy is smiling. And Counselor Troy is like, he's mischievous. He's a rogue, but he absolutely has no ill will. He doesn't mean anything negative. He's a fairly just decent person. So for Picard's reason and understanding, he don't got no problem with that because he's like, okay, finally, we've come across somebody that's decent and for the most part trustworthy. So he opens up the lines of communication and Picard says, our first in command is going to be able to get in contact with you and take care of it. So Riker starts speaking and says, sir, can you cut your engines? Our tractor beam is going to connect with you and be prepared to beam onto the ship. So that's what occurred. He beamed onto the ship. And then who was in the transporter room waiting for him? It was Worf, because, he's part of security. Worf, it was Wesley Crusher, and it was Data. So he beams over, and the first person that he sees is Worf. And so he sees Worf, and he says to Worf, a Klingon security officer. There was no wars available? So Worf was like, weapons. And, in this particular season, Worf don't got no personality. I would say for the first 2 to 3 seasons, he ain't got no personality. He all about work, all about business. And so he's like, weapons. And so he handed him his gun, his blaster. And then Worf is like, come on now, stop playing. And he gives him his knife. And he's like, it's more of a memento. It's really, it's not really worth anything. And so Worf is like eyeing him like, I can't wait to just put my hands around your throat. Because you could look at Worf and see that he just super serious. Everybody else in the room was laughing. Riker was laughing, Data was laughing, and even Wesley Crusher was laughing. And even the transporter lady was laughing. So anyway, he goes over there and starts talking to the transporter lady and smiling and grinning because he hasn't seen any ladies in a while. And so Commander Riker is talking to Wesley about, well, he seems to be an interesting type of character. And he was like, yeah, and he seems to have a healthy libido as well. So what happens is that they leave, they go into the hallway, and it's Data, it's Wesley Crusher, and it's Captain Okona. And they're talking, Worf and Commander Riker going in opposite directions. So I want to say maybe like an hour or so or 2 hours later, because it really doesn't tell you the time frame, but about 2 hours later, Worf is back on the bridge, and he tells Captain Picard that there's another vessel coming into range. And this vessel is a representative, his name's Kushel. and Kushel is from a neighboring planet in the star system. It's like 2 identifiable planets that are inhabited by fairly intelligent humanoids. So they open up communications, and Picard does his spiel. I'm Captain John Picard, blah 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 blah. And so what happens is he's like, well, my name is Kushel, and I'm here to get Okona. You need to release him into my custody. And he's like, now. And so Picard was like, okay, hold on a second. And they mute the conversation. And then what happens is that he looks at Counselor Troy, and Counselor Troy was like, yeah, he seems like he's legitimately upset and mad about something. And so he was like, all right. And then Worf was like, sir, they have their laser weapons trained on us. And then Picard was like, laser weapons? Don't they know that their laser weapons can't even penetrate our navigation shields? Because there's different shields. There's the reflective shields, which are for the main ship's protection against weapons and whatnot. And then you have navigation shields that protect them from like rocks and meteorites traveling when they're at warp speed. So he's like, don't they know that their lasers can't even penetrate our navigation shields? And so Picard was like, okay, let me humble myself. And he was like, Worf, lower main shields and also lower turn off weapons. And then Riker was like, well, sir, that is the regulation. And he was like, a very old regulation. And Riker was like, well, are you serious? And he was like, yeah. And he was like, why are we doing this? And he was like, just in case they plan to board us. And basically what Picard was saying is that their ship is, absolutely no threat to the Enterprise whatsoever. I mean, their technology is antiquated. And with that being said, they can detect that the Enterprise shields is up, and they wouldn't be able to do anything to them. So what they did is he lowered the shields and he humbled himself. So I appreciate that about that Picard, because he was trying to be diplomatic. So anyway, Kushel was quite adamant. He was like, listen, he's wronged my family. He's dishonored my family, and I want his head. And so right then and there, Picard was like, listen, well, we didn't do any real investigation on Okona because, we were just helping him because we're required to. And so he ain't care about that. So then maybe like a few minutes later, it was another vessel. And this other vessel was from the planet Strela. And it was a representative, a leader from the planet Strela. So it was Kushel, and it was also the guy from Strela. And so what he said is he was like, listen, he was like, I'm Captain John Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. And he was like, we know who you are, Picard. We've been listening to this whole communication. He was like, listen, we don't care about what Kushel said. We care about what we're saying. And we want Okona too, because he's a thief. And so Picard was like, well, damn, there's 2 complaints from 2 different people from 2 different planets about this dude. And we thinking this dude everything is copacetic with him. So what happens is that Picard stands up and he taps on his chest to be able to get in contact with Okona. Okona doesn't happen. So you know what Picard does next? He sends his pit bull out there. So he sends his pit bull to go find him. And Worf was amped up to just find him anyway. And he was like, yes. And so Worf was like, another globfly. And so what occurred is that when Worf says something, in the first 2 seasons or 3rd season, what Data would do is he would go into a long explanation. And he was like, when he made the statement about a glidefly, everybody was lost. Like, they didn't know what that was. And he was like, a glidefly is a mosquito insect, is a Klingon insect, half the size of an earth mosquito that makes it sound like a boom. And then Picard was like, Data, like, shut the hell up. Be quiet. Because he would go in a long, like, on some episodes, he'd be like, Data, how long will it take to get to, I don't know, the neutral zone? And Data would be like, at maximum warp, it takes 14 hours, 17 minutes, 84 seconds. And you're like, Data, enough. So what occurs is that he gives them the answer. And so they're like, okay, well, Mr. Worf, go find Okona. So Worf is like, when you see him walk, you see he's like excited he gets to do that. So he finally finds Okona in a female quarters room. And a female's room. And then he's like, come with me now. And Okona blows him off like, dude, get out of here. Like, go back to the bridge. And Worf is like, now. And then Okona turns around and stands up on him like, I'm not going, dude. Like, and he stands up to Worf, and Worf is like, I like that. Because, Worf, he's a warrior. He always looks for battle and an engagement of some kind. So, but he was like, I have my orders. So he couldn't do nothing to him. So what happened is that Okona turned to the lady and was like, you see what it takes to pull me from your arms? And so he leaves. And they're walking down the corridor. And then he was like, so I guess I'm going to meet Captain Picard. And then Worf was like, definitely. And he was like, did I say something funny? And then they get to the bridge. And then he walks down and Worf is like, this is Dadian Okona. And then he extends his hand. Captain Okona extends his hand. And to show you how smug and arrogant Picard is, he does like this. As soon as he extends it, he's like this. Like, he moves out the way. And then he looks at him and says, Captain Okona, we brought you here with no due investigation. Perhaps we were wrong, because now there are multiple ships threatening the Enterprise. And he was like, that'd be crazy. They wouldn't stand a chance. And he was like, yeah, they could run their lasers through. They wouldn't hurt the Enterprise. And so basically, Kushel was saying that Okona had basically slept with his daughter and he got her pregnant and he fled. And the other gentleman from Strela was saying that he stole the jewel of Thesia, a national treasure. And so what happened is that Picard was like, well, damn, we helped this man out and now he got us into a situation where now we got to be like the arbiter to be able to decide who was actually at fault. So what happened is that, Picard pulled Okona into his office and was like, listen, you got me in a predicament. We were just coming to explore the solar system. And now, we are involved in this. And he was like, well, listen, fix my navigation system, fix my engines, and let me be on my way. Picard was like, listen, their ships are faster and they're better armed. And he was like, don't worry about that, Captain. So when he got down to main engineering, he was talking to Wesley Crusher about how he just, lives his life on his own terms. He doesn't follow any orders or instructions. And he's, about himself. And, Riker gave him the explanation of why he does that. And, Wesley at that particular moment, he's about family. He looks at the crew in large, especially the bridge crew, as his family. So he couldn't live that type of lifestyle. And so what happens is that Okona was talking to Geordi, and he was like, well, this is made out of trisolite. If it ever breaks down, I'll never. And then Geordi was like, listen, don't worry about that. Your ship will never outuse this part. It'll never go bad. And so he was just like, you know what? I got some friends around here. I think I'm going to stay. So what happened is he went back to the bridge, and Picard was like, okay, are you leaving? Are you staying? What you doing? And so then he was like, I'm not staying, but I'm also not leaving. I'm going to go ahead and nip this in the bud right now. So that's what occurred. He nipped it in the bud. They had a conference where they went to like an observation lounge and they talked. And so he said, well, Okona was like, well, what am I being accused of? And so Kusel was like, well, you got my daughter pregnant and you left her and you're going to do the right thing, or I'm going to chase you down to the ends of the galaxy. And so then the other guy from Strela was like, well, yeah, you stole the jewel of Thesia, a national treasure. He said it twice. And so Picard was like, listen, which one is it? You're going to have to go with somebody. And he was like, well, I'll take the latter. I'll marry your beautiful daughter and have the baby. And so the son of the leader from Strela was like, no. And he was like, yeah, nah, you can't just escape justice like that fast. You can't do that. No way. And then he was like, no, that's not what I meant, Dad. Like, nah. And so after some time, you was able to see that it was really about two lovebirds from two different planets, and their fathers were adversaries. I don't think they were full-blown enemies, but adversaries in some context. And so what happened is that it was later determined that Ben Zan, the son of the guy from Strela, was secretly in love and also got her pregnant. and he was giving her the jewel of Thesia. And they was using Okona as kind of like a intermediary to be able to go from one planet to the other without causing any kind of suspicion or risk, because of the fact that traders go to each planet, so it's no issue. So what happens is that Okona was like, you see how a man gets a reputation for being negative? And Bakar was like, yeah, I got you. I understand, definitely. And so it was determined that they were actually in love. And so once that was resolved, then everything started to calm down. And then the son, Banzan, was telling Yanara, like, listen, we'll find another planet to live on. And then Banzan's father from Strela was like, oh, no, you won't. You're going to live on our planet. And so then the other gentleman, Kushel, was like, no. I'm not going to have my grandson living in no backwater, dirty planet. And so Bakar was like, well, we've resolved this. Let us take care of our business. You have a nice trip. And so with that one, this episode showed about Okona maintaining his integrity, because he wasn't trying to divulge what was the real issues going on between himself, Lenara, and Banzan. But then also it shows about how family was important, because they were coming together to create a union. And when you do that, you create a family. So, it was a really good episode. And it was also somewhat comical. Data was in the pursuance of trying to understand humor. It was kind of like a side story. But the main story was about Okona. And Okona was overall a decent and caring and understanding and resourceful person. So I asked you this question. Star Trek is episodic. You know this. But when there's the one-off episodes, who do you most feel like you are like? I feel like I'm like Okona. Have a sense of honor, integrity, not going, but at the same time, I'm not someone that's distrustworthy. I know we have our normal heroes in our show, but who do you feel in this particular episode you most resonate with? Because the show was outstanding. It was well written, and the graphics were a little bit, not that great. But this is what happens 25 years ago. So anyway, with that being said, thanks for checking me out. Leave your comments at the bottom, your thoughts. If you enjoyed the episode, if you didn't enjoy the episode, if it was a little too cheesy, if it was just right, whichever your opinion may be, leave a comment. And as always, live long and prosper.